All right, guys, this is Mr. Krepps. I'm going to be leading you through the intro to the war in Vietnam. Just to give you a heads up, you should have PDFs of our textbook in your Google Classroom. And so this is going to be chapters 22, section 1. We're going to have other units on Vietnam, other assignments for you, but this is just a quick introduction to how the United States got themselves so deeply involved in that conflict. First off, Vietnam, and I have a map next slide. Vietnam is a very warm country, hot, tropical climate. It's a relatively poor country, agrarian, meaning a lot of the people are farmers, although they did have a few big cities. And it has a sad history of being occupied by foreign powers, and those foreign powers include, and these aren't all of them, but these are some of the main ones: China, the Japanese, and the French. Now, the French had it in the mid-1800s, and then the Japanese took it during World War II, and then the French got it back after the defeat of the Japanese in 1945. Anyway, because of this, and because of the frustration the Vietnamese have, eventually they are going to mount a revolution, a revolt, and they're going to try to push out foreign powers. And that's going to be what we know now as the Vietnam War. Here's some maps on the left: Asia, Middle East. Here's Vietnam. A lot of coastline, a wet country, huge rivers, especially down here in the south. Mekong Delta. Here's Vietnam over here, another kind of a closer look. Notice you have Hanoi and Saigon both labeled on this map. They're going to be, eventually they're going to be capitals when the country gets split. And then here is a map of what Vietnam looked like when the French occupied it. And notice it's divided into 3 provinces. Down here, though, I would like you to know that this is where a lot of anti-French resentment started. Now, Ho Chi Minh's up here, okay, but down here, especially with a tire company in France called the Michelin Company, they took large sections of this area and they exported the rubber from the rubber tree back to France. And instead of Vietnamese people getting that money so they can build roads and put up power lines and industrialize their country, all that revenue was being exported to the French. This is going to create a ton of resentment for not only the French, but any foreign power that is going to come to colonize the country. So the French are there. They lose it. They gain it back. Japan surrenders. The French stay. There was somewhat of a pattern of colonial countries starting to release their colonies after World War II. And one of the big ones is India. Great Britain released them. To a certain extent, the United States finally gave the Philippines their independence. But the French didn't want to do that. They felt too invested. And they were making a lot of money off of Vietnam. That money could be going to private investors, and that money could also be going to rebuilding the country of France after it just endured its Second World War in 20 years. So the Vietnamese view this as, why are these other countries gaining their independence? Why are the French still here? This is going to escalate animosity towards the French. And that is going to be under the leadership. The Vietnamese who are going to resist are going to fall in line and follow a man named Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh has a very interesting past. I recommend that you do a little search on him. He lived in the United States for a while. He lived in New York. He lived in France, Britain. He was a very educated man. He's going to return to Vietnam being a socialist, being pro-communist, and he's going to gain the support of the Chinese, China, Mao Zedong, and he's also going to gain the support of the Soviet Union. And they're going to help him build an army. They're going to call it the Viet Minh. It'll change to the NVA after that. And this army is going to be able to fight the French. And that's going to happen at a place called Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu is located right up in this region here. It's in North Vietnam. It's a city. And the French were there, and the French forces kind of went in, somewhat arrogant, thinking that they're fighting these peasants, that they're going to have no problems winning this little battle. But that was not the case. This was an underdog story. Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh defeated the French. It was a slaughter. The French did not see it coming. They were unprepared. And at this point, morale for fighting in Vietnam, back in France, and also in the French military, started to decline. And eventually it was decided that the French were going to leave Vietnam. Before they did, knowing that there was an ideological divide between the Vietnamese, whether you're communist or you're anti-communist, they met in Geneva, and they came up with a temporary peace plan which divided the country into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam is led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam is going to be led by a guy named Diem. Now, Diem is not a good guy. He is corrupt all day long. The United States, though, they're going to begin to support Diem because he's anti-communist, and that goes along with the rhetoric of containment. You know, it's just like Chiang Kai-shek, who we supported during the Chinese Civil War. He wasn't the greatest of guys, but he was anti-communist, so he was the guy that we're going to throw our hat in with. And so here's the map of what it's going to look like after the Geneva Accords. Notice the 17th parallel here. South, north. There's a lot of people down here that support the north, not the south. And that's going to prove a problem. You have two new capitals. Hanoi, capital of the north. Saigon, capital of the south. Terms. You've heard of this one already, the containment policy, which dates all the way back to Truman. The Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine and essentially the Eisenhower Doctrine. You have this policy that the United States has gone all in, and they will do whatever they can to keep communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. They do not want it to spread. It spread to China, and we got embarrassed. And then when it started to spread to Korea, we stopped it, and now Korea is north is communist and south is a republic, and so containment kind of worked there a little bit. The difference between Korea and China is we didn't send any troops to China. We just sent money and maybe some advisors and weapons. We sent troops to Korea. Tens of thousands of them were killed. But we got a stalemate, and we got the country's divided. So here we go again. The question is, the North wants the South. The North, Ho Chi Minh wants to unite Vietnam under his rule. The South wants to do the exact same thing. They want to unite Vietnam under Diem's rule, and whoever else is going to come after Diem after he's assassinated in 1963. A new theory comes out where people start using this a lot, called the domino theory, which is a theory that says if one country, specifically a poor country, falls to communism, all of its neighbors will eventually fall too. So the stakes are high. We can't ignore Vietnam, because if we do, the whole region will be communist, and then the American policy of containment will have failed once again. So Eisenhower and Kennedy, they deal with Vietnam much differently than what Lyndon Johnson's going to do when he takes over after Kennedy is assassinated. They send military advisors and personnel, and the goal for Eisenhower and Kennedy is that they wanted to help train the South. They are going to train these South Vietnamese soldiers, and the South Vietnamese will then, in turn, be able to fight the North and at least defend themselves against communism, if not take over the North and turn the country into a republic. The problem is the South Vietnamese are very poor. A lot of them had never been in a car before, how are you going to teach them to fly a helicopter or operate a tank when they don't have running water in their homes and they don't have electricity and they just don't have the experience with the technology to be able to be trained quickly. Can you train them eventually? Probably. Can you do it quickly so they can successfully defend their country? It's not happening. And the I got ahead of myself a little bit. So let's talk about a couple terms before we get into the assassinations. You have ARVN, NVA, and the Viet Cong. ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. These are the allies to the United States. They're the South Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese Army, led by Ho Chi Minh, is the NVA. And then finally you have the Viet Cong. Like I said, the Viet Cong are the people who are living in the South, but they support the North. And so they're going to be doing a lot of sabotage. They're farmers by day, soldiers by night. They typically don't wear uniforms. You can't tell who they are. It's an invisible enemy. And they are going to provide a lot of issues for military personnel. Well, hang with me here. We're almost done. We're going to get to the assassination of JFK. That brings us to 1963. Diem is assassinated a little while after that. Within a few weeks, Kennedy's assassinated. They're not technically linked together, but we can get into that another day. Vietnam is now dropped on the new president's lap, and his name is Lyndon Johnson. And he decides that he is going to stick with the rhetoric that the United States is going to do all it can to prevent the spread of communism. So Lyndon Johnson has a couple decisions that he can choose. He's got some choices on how he wants to handle the problem in Vietnam. And here are his decisions. Here are his options. First off, keep doing what they're doing. Continue sending aid and advisors to try to train the South. Odds are it's not going to work. Containment fails. 2, Lyndon Johnson can just step back and say, look, we got enough stuff going on right now. We got the civil rights movement heating up. We got our own issues at home. Let's just get out of Vietnam. Bring everybody home. Odds are North Vietnam is going to win the Civil War. Containment fails. And Lyndon Johnson politically is going to be hit hard by that because he's going to look weak on communism. Now, communism in the 1960s isn't anything like it was in the 1950s. But people still know the term. And if you get labeled soft on communism, that's not going to be good for you politically. So he's going to go with option 3. He's going to win this war. He's going to make sure communism does not spread. And so he's going to increase combat troops in Vietnam, and he's going to do whatever he can to stop the spread of communism. Now, you can't just start a conflict and start a draft and just start sending American boys to a foreign land, which many people in the United States had never heard of before. The American public isn't going to stand for that. You need an incident. Just like McKinley needed an incident, just like Woodrow Wilson needed an incident in World War I, just like FDR needed an incident in World War II with Pearl Harbor. Right? You got the DeLome letter, you got the sinking of the USS Maine, you have the Lusitania, you got the Zimmerman note, you got Pearl Harbor, you got all these big incidents that happen that the general public in the United States says, yeah, that's bad. I think we should go in. I think it's okay for us to join the war. They drew first blood. And so Johnson's kind of in a holding pattern until August 2, 1964, something happens. And something happens in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin is right here. It's off the coast of North Vietnam. The United States had U.S. Navy ships up there kind of doing surveillance on the coast. They're doing some patrolling. Story is a North Vietnamese vessel fired torpedoes at the USS Maddox. A firefight happened. Nothing happened to the Maddox. Some damage happened to North Vietnamese Navy craft. Regardless, so they report back to Washington, we've been attacked by the communists. Unprovoked attack, so they say. 2 days later, another call back to Washington saying it happened again. Come to find out that the second incident was a lie. So here's the incident that Johnson's been waiting for. He goes to Congress. He asks for a resolution. Give me power, give me money to do what I need to do in Vietnam. And Congress overwhelmingly approves the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gives the president a ton of power to do anything really that he wanted. He's got to get money from Congress, but at the time, American boys were attacked by communists in the Gulf of Tonkin. People are pretty quick to give out money to the military for maybe some revenge, some payback. So this is not a declaration of war, technically. The Vietnam War probably shouldn't even be called the Vietnam War. It should be called the conflict in Vietnam. But that's it. That's how we got started. And in 1964, we're going to start escalation. We're going to start sending troops over there. And it's not going to go well. And we're going to send more, and we're going to send more. And eventually, we're going to have 500,000 troops walking around Vietnam. You guys will learn more in other lessons. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go back, review the slides. Email me if you have any questions. And have a good night.